In the gleaming penthouse of Thorn Tower, Alexander Thorn stood with his back to the panoramic windows that framed the city like a living portrait he personally owned. At 63, his silver hair and tailored Brioni suit were as immaculate as the empire he'd built from nothing. The morning light caught on his titanium watch, a limited edition worth more than what most people earned in 5 years. "Excuse me, sir," his assistant Julian whispered from the doorway. "Your son is here." Alexander didn't turn. "Send him in." He heard the familiar, confident stride of his only heir, Elijah Thorn, Harvard Business School graduate, 32, years old and groomed since birth to inherit the $78 billion Thorn Industries conglomerate. But recently Elijah had been distracted. "Dad," Elijah began, his voice carrying an unusual tension. "Thanks for meeting me before your Shanghai flight." Alexander finally turned, his steel-gray eyes scanning his son. "You said it was important. Make it quick." Elijah squared his shoulders, a gesture Alexander recognized as preparation for confrontation. "I'm getting married." The words hung in the air like smoke. Alexander's expression didn't change, but something cold and calculating flickered behind his eyes. "Congratulations," he said flatly. "To which Vanderbilt or Astor daughter have you finally committed?" Elijah swallowed. "Her name is Sofia Mendez." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Alexander's finger tapped once. On his desk, the only visible sign of his displeasure. "Mendez?" His voice was soft, dangerous. "Not familiar with that family. Old money from Europe, perhaps?" "She's a kindergarten teacher in Queens," Elijah said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Her mother cleans houses. Her father died when she was 12. Alexander's laugh was like broken glass. "Is this some sort of joke?" "I love her, Dad." "Love?" Alexander spoke the word as if it were in a foreign language he refused to learn. "You are a Thorn. You don't marry for something as pedestrian as love. You marry for connections, for power, for advantage." Outside, clouds began to gather over the skyline, darkening the penthouse. "I'm marrying her in June," Elijah said. "I wanted you to hear it from me first." Alexander walked to his desk and pressed a button. Instantly, Julian appeared. "Call the board, emergency meeting at 3. He turned to Elijah. "You have a choice to make, son. Your birthright or this woman. That's not fair." "Fair?" Alexander's voice finally rose. "I built this empire from nothing. While you were being educated at private schools, I was working 18-hour days. While you vacationed in the Maldives, I was negotiating deals that changed the global economy. I didn't create a dynasty for you to throw it away on some gold digger from Queens." "Don't you dare call her that." Elijah's face flushed with anger. "You don't even know her." "I know enough." Alexander's voice became eerily calm again. "Bring her to dinner tomorrow night. My private dining room at La Ciel, 8 o'clock. Elijah hesitated, caught off guard by the unexpected invitation. "You want to meet her?" Alexander's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, if she's to be a Thorn, I should at least see what we're getting." As Elijah left, relief visible in his shoulders, Alexander turned back to the windows. The gathering. Storm now mirrored his own thoughts. No kindergarten teacher was going to dilute his bloodline or get her hands on his legacy. By this time tomorrow, this little problem would be taken care of, permanently. Sofia Mendez stared at her reflection in the restroom mirror of La Ciel, the Michelin-starred restaurant perched on the 67th floor of one of Manhattan's most exclusive buildings. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the modest pearl earrings her mother had given her for her college graduation. The black dress she'd splurged on, the most expensive clothing she'd ever purchased, suddenly felt inadequate among the wealth that surrounded her. "You belong here as much as anyone," she whispered to herself, repeating the mantra Elijah had told her that morning. Outside the restroom, Elijah paced nervously. When Sofia emerged, his face softened with admiration. "You look beautiful," he said, taking her hand. "I'm terrified," Sofia admitted, her voice barely audible over the ambient piano music floating. through the restaurant. What if he hates me? Elijah squeezed her hand. Just be yourself. That's who I fell in love with. The maitre d' led them through the main dining room, a symphony of crystal, white linen, and soft lighting, to a private door guarded by a suited man with an earpiece. Beyond it was a separate dining room with a single table overlooking the glittering city. Alexander Thorne stood by the windows, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. "Father," Elijah said, his voice formal, "this is Sofia Mendez." Alexander turned slowly. His gaze swept over Sofia with clinical precision, taking in every detail from her simple hairstyle to her department store shoes. His expression revealed nothing. "Miss Mendez," he said finally, not extending his hand. "Please sit." The meal began with painful formality. Alexander asked pointed questions about Sofia's family, her education at the state university, her job teaching at a public school in Queens. Each answer seemed to be mentally catalogued and filed away as evidence. "And your mother," Alexander said, cutting into his Wagyu steak with surgical precision. "She cleans homes for a living?" "Yes," Sofia answered, her chin lifting slightly. "She raised me alone after my father died. She worked 3 jobs sometimes to put me through college." "How inspirational," Alexander said, the word dripping with condescension. "Tell me, have you ever been to Europe?" "No, I haven't had the opportunity to travel much." "Do you speak any languages other than English and whatever Spanish your mother taught you?" Elijah set down his fork with a clatter. "Dad, it's a simple question," Alexander interrupted, his eyes never leaving Sofia. "I studied French in college," Sofia replied, her voice steady despite the flush rising to her cheeks. "I'm not fluent, but I can manage a conversation." Alexander smiled thinly. "A conversation about what? The weather? Certainly not art or literature or global economics." "That's enough," Elijah said, his voice tight with anger. "No, please," Alexander continued, signaling for more wine. "I'm simply getting to know the woman my son has apparently chosen, the woman who would represent the Thorne name at global summits, at charity galas, at board meetings." He leaned forward. "Tell me, Miss Mendez, what's your net worth?" Sofia's hands clenched in her lap. "I don't think that's less than 6 figures, I'd wager," Alexander cut in. "Do you have any idea what my son is worth?" "I don't care about Elijah's money," Sofia said, her voice finally betraying emotion. Alexander laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Everyone cares about money, Miss Mendez, especially those who've never had it." Elijah stood abruptly. "We're leaving." "Sit down," Alexander commanded. "I'm not finished." "Yes, you are," Elijah replied, helping Sofia to her feet. Alexander's eyes narrowed. "If you walk out that door with her, consider your position at Thorne Industries terminated. Your trust fund frozen. Your entire future gone." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the city below. Sofia felt her heart hammering in her chest. "You can't be serious," Elijah whispered. "I've never been more serious in my life," Alexander replied, casually taking a sip of wine. "Choose, son. Your birthright or this distraction." Sofia felt the world tilting beneath her feet. She looked at Elijah, saw the conflict raging behind his eyes, the impossible choice between the only family he had ever known and their future together. "You don't have to do this," she whispered to him, tears blurring her vision. "I would never ask you to give up everything." Alexander watched them, a predatory satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. He had calculated this moment perfectly, the ultimate test of his control. "Perhaps I've been unclear," Alexander said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a check and slid it across the table to Sofia. $1 million, tax-free, for you to walk away and never contact my son again." Sofia stared at the check, then at Alexander's cold smile, feeling as though she might be sick. The cruelty was so calculated, so precise, designed to strip away every shred of her dignity. Now we understand each other, Alexander continued smoothly. Everyone has a price, Miss Mendez. I'm simply offering to pay yours. The autumn rain lashed against the windows of Sophia's tiny queen's apartment as she grated papers at her kitchen table. 3 months had passed since that fateful night at La Ciel. 3 months since Elijah had stammered apologies, his face contorted with indecision, before finally crumpling the check and walking out with her. 3 months since Alexander Thorne had methodically destroyed his son's life. First came the termination letter from Thorne Industries, then the eviction notice from Elijah's company-owned apartment, the frozen accounts, the canceled credit cards, the whisper campaign that spread through Manhattan's elite circles like wildfire. Elijah Thorne had suffered some kind of breakdown, was possibly unstable, definitely unreliable for business. Sophia's phone buzzed with a text message. Elijah. Interview went well. Home soon. She set down her red pen and rubbed her temples. Elijah was on his 4th job interview this week. The previous 3 companies had mysteriously rescinded their offers after initial enthusiasm. It didn't take much imagination to guess why. A knock at the door startled her. Too early to be Elijah. She peered through the peephole to see an elegantly dressed woman in her 60s, her silver-streaked black hair pulled into a severe bun. Ms. Mendez? The woman's voice was clipped, professional. My name is Victoria Lang. I represent Alexander Thorne. Sophia's heart stuttered. She opened the door but didn't invite the woman in. What do you want? Victoria's eyes took in the modest apartment with the same clinical assessment Alexander had used on Sophia. Mr. Thorne wishes to speak with you. Alone. Why would I ever agree to that? Victoria extended a business card. Because you care about Elijah's future and because you're smarter than Mr. Thorne initially gave you credit for. An hour later, Sophia found herself back in Manhattan, this time in Alexander's private office at Thorne Tower. The space was cavernous, dominated by a mahogany desk that seemed designed to diminish anyone sitting across from it. Alexander didn't stand when she entered. Thank you for coming, Miss Mendez. Let's skip the pretense, Sophia said, remaining standing. What do you want? Something like respect flickered in Alexander's eyes. Direct. Good. I've been watching you and my son these past months. You've been resilient. We love each other. And look where that love has gotten him, Alexander replied coldly. From heir to a global empire to interviewing for middle management positions that mysteriously fall through. Sophia felt her nails digging into her palms. You're blocking him from getting work. I'm protecting my interests, Alexander corrected, but I'm prepared to stop, to reinstate Elijah at Thorne Industries, to return his inheritance. He leaned forward. For a price. Another check? Sophia asked bitterly. No, I've realized money isn't your motivation. Admirable, if foolish. Alexander stood and walked to the window. I'm offering Elijah his life back, his purpose. In exchange, you end the relationship. Make him believe it's your decision, that you never loved him. The cruelty of the request took Sophia's breath away. You want me to break his heart. I want to save him from wasting his potential on a kindergarten teacher from Queens, Alexander replied. He was born for greatness. With you, he'll spend his life in mediocrity, growing to resent you more each day. Tears stung Sophia's eyes. You don't know your son at all. I know him better than you ever will, Alexander countered. I've watched him since he took his first breath. I know what he needs, even when he doesn't. He pressed a button and Victoria entered with a document. This is a non-disclosure agreement. Sign it, end things with Elijah tonight, and he gets everything back. His position, his home, his future. Alexander's voice softened with calculated precision. If you truly love him, you'll want what's best for him. Sophia stared at the document, her vision blurring. And if I refuse? Alexander's smile was chilling in its sincerity. Then I'll continue ensuring he never works again. Not in finance, not in business, not even teaching at that little school you love so much. I have influence in places you cannot imagine. Sophia took the pen Victoria offered, her hand trembling. "You'll destroy him either way," she whispered. "No," Alexander replied. "I'm saving him. And one day when he's running Thorn Industries, when he's married to someone worthy of our name, he'll understand that everything I did was out of love." As Sophia signed her name on the document, she felt as though she were signing away her soul. Outside the tower, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained dark with storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The winter gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art marked the social highlight of the season. Alexander Thorn stood at the center of admiring sycophants, his tuxedo impeccable, his demeanor regal. 6 months had passed since Sophia had walked out of Elijah's life with rehearsed words that shattered him. "I never loved you. I was using you." The plan had worked perfectly. After weeks of despair, Elijah had returned to the fold, hollow-eyed but compliant. Alexander had orchestrated everything: the sympathetic welcome back, the carefully chosen therapy sessions with a psychiatrist on his payroll, the introduction to Cassandra Winters, daughter of a shipping magnate and deemed suitable for the Thorn name. "Alexander," Gregory Palmer, CEO of a rival tech company, approached with champagne in hand. "Your stock hit another record high today. The Thorn touch turns everything to gold." Alexander nodded with practiced humility. "The team deserves the credit." "And how's Elijah? I hear wedding bells might be ringing soon." "Cassandra is a perfect match," Alexander replied smoothly. "The announcement should come this spring." As the conversation continued, Alexander's attention drifted to the entrance where the museum's newest board members were being announced. His expression froze when he spotted a familiar face among them: Carmen Mendez, Sophia's mother, elegantly dressed and accompanied by Richard Hargrove, one of New York's most renowned philanthropists. "Excuse me," Alexander murmured, moving closer to overhear their conversation. "Mrs. Mendez's foundation has done remarkable work providing educational opportunities in underserved communities," Hargrove was saying to the museum director. "Her daughter's research on early childhood development has revolutionized approaches nationwide." Alexander felt a cold trickle of unease. This wasn't part of his calculations. Across the room, Elijah entered alone, his engagement to Cassandra still unofficial despite Alexander's careful orchestration. His son's eyes were clear tonight, more focused than they had been in months. There was something different about him, a hardness that hadn't been there before. Alexander watched as Elijah spotted Carmen Mendez, watched as recognition dawned on his son's face, watched as Elijah approached her with purpose. "It's time for your speech, Mr. Thorn," his assistant reminded him. Alexander nodded distractedly. He ascended to the podium, his practiced smile in place as applause filled the grand hall. But his eyes remained fixed on Elijah and Carmen, deep in conversation now. "It is my great honor to announce tonight that Thorn Industries will be donating $50 million to the museum's educational programs," Alexander began, his voice commanding attention. As he continued his prepared remarks, he noticed Elijah slipping away with Carmen toward a private alcove. Something was wrong. His carefully constructed world was shifting beneath his feet. Alexander cut his speech short to thunderous applause and made his way through the crowd with determined grace. When he reached the alcove, he found Elijah holding a document, the NDA Sophia had signed. "Looking for this, Dad?" Elijah asked, his voice deadly quiet. Alexander assessed the situation with the same cold calculation he applied to business deals. "How did you get that? Does it matter?" Elijah's eyes were hard, unrecognizable. "For months I've been playing your game, pretending to be the broken son who'd seen the light, pretending to forget Sophia, all while using the resources you so generously restored to investigate what really happened." Carmen Mendez stood silently beside him, her expression a mirror of her daughter's dignity. "You don't understand what's at stake," Alexander began. "I understand perfectly," Elijah interrupted. "I understand that you threatened the woman I love, that you forced her to break my heart to save me." His laugh was brittle, humorless. "Did you know she's been working with education researchers? At Columbia? That her curriculum is being adopted by schools across the country? That while you were busy trying to destroy her, she was building something meaningful? Alexander felt the first genuine flicker of fear. Whatever you think you know, I know everything, Elijah said, including what happened to Rivera Technologies after they refused your takeover, the accounting irregularities that mysteriously appeared in their books, the witnesses who suddenly changed their testimonies. Alexander's face paled. Be very careful, son. No, Dad. You be careful. Elijah handed him a different document. The board meets tomorrow at 9. This is my proposal for your retirement. Generous terms, full benefits, a legacy intact, publicly at least. You wouldn't dare, Alexander whispered. I've spent 6 months gathering evidence of every questionable deal, every ethical breach, every line you've crossed, Elijah replied. Sophia taught me something you never could. That real strength isn't about control. It's about integrity. Behind them, the gala continued, oblivious to the dynasty crumbling in their midst. You need me, Alexander said, desperation edging into his voice. Elijah's expression softened with something like pity. No, Dad. I needed you to love me, to trust me, to see me as more than a vessel for your ambitions. He straightened his shoulders. Sign the retirement papers by morning, or I release everything. Your choice. As Elijah walked away with Carmen, Alexander Thorne stood alone, the document trembling in his hands. For the first time in his life, he had been outmaneuvered, not by a business rival, but by the son he had tried to control and the woman he had underestimated. That night, as snow began to fall over Manhattan, Alexander signed the papers in his empty penthouse. The empire he had built would continue without him. The dynasty would take a direction he had never envisioned. And somewhere, in Queens, the woman he had judged unworthy was helping to create a legacy more meaningful than all his billions.
The clinking sound of fine china echoed faintly in the spacious dining room as Rose Carter adjusted the floral centerpiece on the table. The scent of freshly baked bread lingered in the air, blending with the faint aroma of jasmine from the candles she had carefully lit. Tonight was their wedding anniversary. A quiet evening she had planned to remind Forrest of the life they had built together. She smoothed her hands over her pale blue dress, the one he always said brought out the color of her eyes. The door clicked open, and the rhythmic sound of Forrest Bennett's polished Oxfords on the wooden floor filled the room. Rose turned, her face lighting up momentarily as he entered. He looked immaculate as always, his tailored suit fitting perfectly, but his expression was distant. He didn't smile, didn't even notice the effort she had put into this evening. Her heart sank a little. "You're home," she said, her voice warm but tentative. Forrest offered a curt nod, setting his briefcase down without a glance at the table. "Long day at work," he muttered, loosening his tie. Rose hesitated before speaking again, determined to close the growing distance between them. "I thought we could have dinner together, just like old times. Celebrate. Us." He finally looked at her, but there was no spark of affection, only weariness. "Rose," he began, his tone carrying a weight that made her chest tighten. "We need to talk." The warmth in the room seemed to evaporate. Forrest stepped forward and placed a thin envelope on the table, right beside the carefully arranged flowers and dinner plates. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rose's hands trembled as she reached for the envelope, her fingers brushing the edges of the paper as if hoping it might disappear. "What is this?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. Forrest sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "I can't do this anymore. Us. It isn't working." Her vision blurred as she unfolded the papers inside. Divorce papers, each line of text a dagger cutting through the life they had built together. "Is there someone else?" Rose asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Forrest hesitated, the faintest flicker of guilt crossing his face. "It's not about that. It's about me. I need something different." Tears welled up in Rose's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Different," she repeated, her voice breaking. "We've built a life together, Forrest. I stood by you through everything. I believed in you when no one else did." "I know," he said softly, his voice tinged with regret. "And I'll always be grateful for that. But I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not." He reached for his briefcase, avoiding her gaze. "I'll stay at a hotel tonight. Take the time you need to process this." As the door closed behind him, Rose was left standing in the glow of the flickering candles, her world crumbling around her. The meal she had so carefully prepared sat untouched on the table, an ironic symbol of the life she had tried so hard to preserve. Rose stood frozen, her hand still gripping the edge of the table as the weight of Forrest's departure settled over her. The room, once filled with warmth and anticipation, now felt unbearably hollow. Her gaze fell to the divorce papers on the table, each word blurring into a sea of meaningless lines. She pulled out a chair and sat down slowly, her trembling hands gripping the edge of the table for support. Her mind raced, fragments of their life together flashing before her eyes. She remembered the nights when they'd shared instant noodles in their cramped apartment, dreaming of a brighter future. The first time Forrest told her about his tech startup idea, his eyes alight with excitement. Back then, his passion had been contagious, and she'd believed in him with every fiber of her being. She'd worked double shifts at the hospital to support them while he poured his soul into building his company. And they'd done it. They'd made it together. The startup flourished, transforming into a billion-dollar empire. They moved into a penthouse, a far cry from their humble beginnings. But somewhere along the way, the man she fell in love with had been replaced by someone she barely recognized. Her heart twisted as she recalled the moments she'd dismissed over the past year. The missed dinners, the nights when Forrest claimed to be working late, the emotional distance that had grown between them. She had told herself they were just going through a rough patch, something all couples faced. But now, with the cold reality of the divorce papers in front of her, she couldn't ignore the truth. Rose's fingers brushed against the edge of her engagement ring. She had never taken it off, not even during their worst arguments. Now it felt heavy, a painful reminder of promises that had been broken. Slowly, she slid the ring from her finger and set it down on the table. She glanced around the room, taking in the flickering candles, the untouched food, and the anniversary card she had written earlier that day, still resting on the counter. A single tear slid down her cheek as she pushed herself up from the chair. Moving mechanically, she cleared the table, wrapping up the dinner she had made with so much hope. As she placed the dishes in the refrigerator, she caught her reflection in the glass door. Her pale blue dress, once her favorite, now seemed like a cruel joke. She reached up and wiped at her tears, forcing herself to take deep breaths. Rose wasn't sure how long she stood there, staring into the emptiness of her kitchen, but eventually she turned off the lights and walked to the bedroom. The space felt cavernous without Forrest's presence. She sat on the edge of the bed, the silence pressing down on her. For the first time that night, anger flared up in her chest, cutting through the haze of despair. How could he walk away so easily? How could he discard everything they had built together? The questions swirled in her mind, but no answers came. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling her out of her thoughts. She reached for it, half hoping it might be Forrest, but the screen displayed Dr. Grace Chen's name. Rose hesitated for a moment before answering. "Rose," Grace's warm, steady voice came through. "Are you okay?" Rose opened her mouth to respond, but found herself choking on the words. A soft sob escaped her instead, and the tears she had fought so hard to hold back began to flow freely. "Come over," Grace said firmly. "Right now. You shouldn't be alone." Rose nodded, though Grace couldn't see her. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she managed to say before hanging up. She changed out of the blue dress, slipping into a simple sweater and jeans. As she grabbed her keys and headed out the door, she glanced back at the apartment one last time. It was the same place she had lived in for years, but tonight it felt like a stranger's home. The drive to Grace's house was a blur. Rose gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind alternating between grief and anger. She wasn't sure what she'd say to Grace when she got there, but at least she wouldn't have to face the night alone. And as she pulled into Grace's driveway, a new thought flickered in her mind, one that refused to be silenced. She needed to rebuild, not for Forrest, but for herself. Whatever came next, she would face it. But for now, she allowed herself the space to grieve, not realizing that her life was about to take an even more unexpected turn. Rose stared at the ultrasound screen, her breath caught in her throat. The soft hum of the machine filled the room as Dr. Wilson adjusted the probe, her expression calm but tinged with surprise. Rose's heart pounded in her chest, every nerve in her body on edge. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Wilson murmured, leaning closer to the monitor. "I'm seeing 4 distinct heartbeats." The words hung in the air, incomprehensible at first. Rose blinked, her mind struggling to catch up. 4? She echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Wilson smiled gently. "Quadruplets. It's rare, but it happens. Based on what I'm seeing, everything looks healthy so far, but this will be classified as a high-risk pregnancy. We'll need to monitor you closely." Rose pressed a trembling hand to her stomach, the reality of what she was hearing sinking in. 4 babies. 4 lives growing inside her. For years, she had dreamed of becoming a mother, but the timing had always felt wrong. Forrest had said they needed to wait until the company stabilized, until they had more time, until they were ready. And now, when her marriage had crumbled and her life felt like it was in pieces, here she was, carrying not one, but 4 children. "Are you okay?" Dr. Wilson asked, her tone soft and reassuring. Rose nodded, though her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. I just need a moment." Dr. Wilson handed her a towel to wipe off the gel and sat down beside her. "It's a lot to process," she said kindly, "but you're not alone in this. I'll make sure you have the best care possible, and we'll take this one step at a time." Rose forced a small smile, grateful for the doctor's compassion, but her thoughts were elsewhere. What would this mean for her future, for her career, for the life she was trying to rebuild? And Forrest. Should she tell him? Her stomach churned at the thought. She left the office clutching a folder of prenatal care instructions and a grainy ultrasound photo of 4 tiny shapes, each representing a life she was now responsible for. The air outside felt cool against her skin, but it did little to calm her racing mind. She sat in her car for a long moment, staring at the photo. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, a quiet resolve began to form within her. She didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear. She would protect these babies with everything she had. They were hers, and she wouldn't let them be drawn into the chaos of her broken marriage or the relentless scrutiny of Forrest's high-profile world. With a deep breath, Rose started the engine and drove home. Her small apartment, though modest, was a safe haven now. It wasn't the luxurious penthouse she had shared with Forrest, but it was hers. She placed the ultrasound photo on the kitchen counter and began to tidy up, letting the rhythm of the familiar task ground her. Her phone buzzed with a message from Grace. "Checking in on you. How are you feeling?" Rose stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She considered telling Grace everything, but the words felt too heavy to type. Instead, she replied, "I'm okay, just processing a lot." The reply came instantly. "I'm here whenever you're ready." Rose set the phone down, her gaze returning to the ultrasound photo. She traced her finger over the tiny shapes, a mixture of fear and determination coursing through her. She didn't know how she would do this, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let fear dictate her future. In the following days, Rose threw herself into preparing for the monumental changes ahead. The initial shock of discovering she was carrying quadruplets had given way to a quiet determination. She began organizing her life with meticulous precision, making lists, researching everything she could about multiple births, and creating a budget to stretch her savings as far as possible. Her first priority was making her small apartment feel like a home for her growing family. The spare room, once a cluttered storage space, became a blank canvas. Rose spent her evenings cleaning it out, envisioning soft pastel walls and matching cribs. She sketched layouts for how she would fit 4 tiny beds, a changing table, and shelves for supplies into the cozy space. Margaret Torres, her neighbor, noticed the changes and stopped by one evening with a basket of freshly baked cookies. "You've been busy in here," Margaret remarked, her sharp eyes taking in the newly emptied room. "What's the occasion?" Rose hesitated, unsure if she was ready to share her news. But something about Margaret's kind smile made her feel at ease. "I'm pregnant," she admitted, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. Margaret beamed. "Well, congratulations. That's wonderful news." Rose hesitated before adding, "It's quadruplets." Margaret's eyes widened, but her smile never faltered. "Oh, my dear, you're going to have your hands full. But don't worry, you're not alone. If you need anything, Anything at all, you let me know. Rose nodded, feeling a flicker of gratitude. She hadn't expected Margaret's immediate support, but it reminded her that she wasn't completely on her own. At the hospital, her colleague Grace Chen was just as supportive, though more practical in her approach. "You need a plan," Grace said during one of their lunch breaks, sliding a notebook across the table. "A real detailed plan, budget, medical appointments, childcare, the works. Let's start with the basics." Together, they listed out everything Rose would need, from prenatal vitamins to finding a reliable part-time nanny for when the babies arrived. Grace even offered to adjust Rose's schedule at the clinic to accommodate her appointments. "You've got this," Grace said, with a reassuring smile as she closed the notebook. "And when you feel like you don't, just remember, you've got people who've got your back." Despite the help, there were nights when the weight of her circumstances pressed down on her. Rose would sit in the middle of the empty spare room, surrounded by baby name books and parenting guides, and feel the enormity of what lay ahead. The silence of the apartment was both a comfort and a reminder of Forrest's absence. She thought about telling him, but every time she considered it, the image of those divorce papers flashed in her mind. Forrest had made his choice. He wanted a different life, one that didn't include her. She wouldn't let these babies become a bargaining chip or a media spectacle in his world. One evening, as she sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through an old photo album, she paused at a picture of her and Forrest from their early days. They were laughing, arms wrapped around each other, their faces glowing with hope and love. Her chest ached at the memory, but she closed the album and placed it back on the shelf. "This is a new chapter," she whispered, resting her hand on her stomach. "And we'll write it together, the 5 of us." Outside, the city lights flickered and the faint hum of traffic filled the air. Rose leaned back against the wall, letting the quiet moment wash over her. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew she would face whatever came next with strength, for herself and for her children. Unbeknownst to her, the decisions she made now would set the course for a future far more complicated and intertwined than she could imagine. Rose's mornings had become a careful routine, each movement deliberate as she navigated the challenges of her pregnancy. At 24 weeks, her growing belly made even the simplest tasks a delicate balancing act. Despite the strain, she moved with purpose, her determination to create a stable life for her children fueling her every action. She stood in the middle of the small spare room, now transformed into the beginnings of a nursery. The walls were painted a soothing pastel green, and soft yellow curtains hung in the window. The scent of fresh paint lingered in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of lavender from the candles Margaret had brought her. A single crib stood assembled in the corner, a gift from Grace, who had taken it upon herself to help Rose prepare. Rose knelt slowly, her movements measured, as she unpacked a box of baby clothes. Tiny onesies, soft blankets, and matching booties in sets of 4 were carefully folded and placed into the small dresser she had repurposed. Each piece was a promise to herself, a symbol of the life she was building for her children. Margaret appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray with tea and toast. "You're making progress," she said with a warm smile, setting the tray down on the dresser. Rose pushed herself upright, grateful for the brief pause. "It's starting to feel real," she admitted, glancing around the room. "But there's still so much to do." Margaret handed her a cup of tea. "One step at a time. And remember, you're not alone. Grace, the nurses and I, we're all here to help." Rose nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had always been fiercely independent, but in these moments she realized how much she valued the community she had found. Later that day, Rose headed to the clinic for her shift. Her white coat barely fit over her growing belly, but she wore it proudly. Patients and their families greeted her warmly, and for a few hours she could focus on something other than her own worries. During her lunch break, Grace joined her in the staff lounge, a notebook in hand. "All right," Grace said, flipping it open. "We need to talk about your birth plan." Rose raised an eyebrow. "You're taking this more seriously than I am," she joked, though the truth was she felt overwhelmed by the logistics. "Someone has to," Grace replied with a grin. "Now, I've found a specialist who's worked with high-risk pregnancies like yours, and I've booked a consultation for next week. We'll also need to look at childcare options for after the babies arrive, and your work schedule. We need to make sure you're taking enough time off." Rose leaned back in her chair, sipping her water. "I don't know how I'm going to juggle all of this," she admitted softly. Grace reached over and squeezed her hand. "You'll figure it out, you always do. And until then, you've got me, Margaret, and everyone else here to lean on." Rose smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment she felt a spark of confidence that she could face it head-on. Unbeknownst to her, the support system she was building would soon be tested in ways she couldn't anticipate, as her past began to intertwine with her present in ways that would change everything. The weeks passed quickly, and Rose's small apartment began to take on the warmth of a home prepared for new life. The nursery, now fully furnished with 4 cribs, soft rugs, and a mobile that played gentle lullabies, became her sanctuary. Whenever doubts crept in about money, time, or her ability to raise quadruplets alone, she would stand in the doorway and remind herself of her purpose. One evening, after a long day at the clinic, Rose sat on the couch surrounded by stacks of books and printouts. Parenting guides, financial plans, and research on multiple births were scattered around her, but her focus kept slipping. Her mind drifted to Forrest. She hadn't spoken to him since the divorce, hadn't even told him about the pregnancy. Every time she considered reaching out, the memory of his distant expression and those divorce papers resurfaced, hardening her resolve. Still, there were moments when she wondered, did he think of her at all? Would he want to know about the children if he did? Or had he truly moved on, fully immersed in a life where she and the family they once dreamed of had no place? Rose shook the thoughts away and focused on her task for the evening, budgeting. Despite her savings and the modest income from the clinic, the costs of raising 4 children were staggering. Margaret had introduced her to a local community support group, and they had offered her a grant for new mothers in need. It was a start, but Rose knew she had to be resourceful. Her phone buzzed with a notification, breaking her concentration. It was an email from Dr. Patel, the high-risk pregnancy specialist Grace had referred her to. Scanning the message, Rose felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The specialist had availability for the following week, and while Rose was grateful to have such a capable doctor on her side, the reality of what lay ahead loomed large. That weekend, Grace stopped by the apartment with a surprise. "I know you've been stressing," she said, pulling a small box from her bag, "so I thought this might help." Rose opened the box to find a hand-painted sign that read, "Where love grows, miracles bloom." She traced her fingers over the words, her throat tightening with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. Grace shrugged. "You're going to need reminders like this when things get tough. And they will get tough, Rose. But I've seen you handle more than most people ever could. You've got this." The two spent the rest of the afternoon arranging the nursery and talking about everything from baby names to sleep schedules. For the first time in weeks, Rose allowed herself to laugh, the weight on her shoulders momentarily lifting. But as the sun set and Grace left, the shadows of uncertainty crept back in. Rose stood in the nursery, the sign Grace had given her hanging above the row of cribs. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the subtle flutters of movement beneath her skin. "You're not just miracles," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tears brimming in her eyes. "You're my everything. And I promise, no matter what happens, I'll make this work." Outside, the night settled over the city, and for the first time in a long while, Rose felt a sense of calm. Yet, even as she embraced the quiet resolve, her mind couldn't help but linger on the unknown. Unseen to her, the choices she had made to protect her family were already setting the stage for a confrontation she could not avoid, one that would bring Forrest back into her life in ways she hadn't expected. 5 years had passed, and the modest apartment that once felt too small now buzzed with the energy of 4 lively children. Rose had grown into her role as a mother with an unyielding strength that amazed even herself. Her days were a whirlwind of breakfast chaos, school drop-offs, and evenings spent helping with puzzles or colouring books. The nursery had long since been transformed into a shared bedroom for Jade, Liam, Caleb, and Noah, each corner reflecting their unique personalities. Jade's shelves overflowed with sketchbooks and crayons, her budding artistic talent already shining through. Liam, the eldest by just a few minutes, kept his side of the room meticulously organized, his leadership evident even among his siblings. Noah's side was filled with books and small science kits, while Caleb's soft toys and carefully arranged storybooks spoke to his quiet, nurturing nature. Rose often marveled at how different they were, yet how deeply connected they remained. The bond they shared was unshakable, a fortress of love and trust that she had worked tirelessly to build. Her career, too, had flourished. The small community clinic she started working at after leaving the hospital had grown into one of the most respected pediatric practices in the area. Parents trusted her not only for her expertise, but for the genuine care she showed to every child. Her colleagues admired her resilience, often unaware of the challenges she faced as a single mother. One crisp autumn morning, Rose sat in her office at the clinic, reviewing patient files. Her phone buzzed with a notification from the local parenting newsletter she subscribed to, featuring an article about balancing work and motherhood. She skimmed it, nodding at familiar advice before pausing at a line near the end. "Remember, no one can do it all alone." The words lingered in her mind as she sipped her coffee. She had done so much alone. She had no choice. But there were still moments when the weight of it all felt overwhelming. Her support system, though invaluable, could only help so much. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was Margaret, who now worked part-time at the clinic as a receptionist. "Rose, there's someone here to see you. They're asking about scheduling for quadruplets. I thought you'd want to meet them." Rose smiled and stood, grateful for the distraction. She walked into the waiting room, where a woman with tired eyes and a newborn in a carrier was trying to calm 3 other children. Rose's smile widened as she approached. "You must be the one Margaret mentioned. I'm Dr. Carter." The woman looked up, visibly relieved. "Yes, I'm Lisa. I heard from a friend that you're the best for handling, well, this," she said, gesturing at her children. Rose knelt slightly, meeting the eyes of one of the toddlers who clung to his mother's leg. "You've got a beautiful family," she said warmly. "Let's talk about how we can help." As she guided Lisa into an exam room, Rose felt a sense of fulfillment. Helping other parents navigate the chaos of raising multiple children felt like a calling, a way to give back what she had learned through her own experience. Yet, as the day wound down and she returned home to her own chaotic household, Rose couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully constructed life was on the brink of change. Something unspoken lingered in the air, a quiet anticipation she couldn't quite name. That evening, after the kids were tucked into bed, Rose settled onto the couch with a cup of tea and her laptop. It was her rare moment of peace, a chance to catch up on emails and plan for the week ahead. The house was quiet except for the occasional sound of Jade turning in her sleep or Noah murmuring in one of his dreams. As she opened her inbox, her eyes caught an email subject line that made her stomach tighten. Feature article, The Future of Tech, with Forrest Bennett. Rose hesitated, her hand hovering over the mouse. She hadn't searched Forrest's name in years, deliberately avoiding news about him and the world he inhabited. Yet now, here he was, intruding on her carefully constructed world without even trying. Against her better judgment, she clicked on the article. The glossy photo at the top showed Forrest standing confidently in front of his company's headquarters, his suit impeccably tailored, his smile sharp and practiced. The headline praised him as a visionary, a leader in cutting-edge technology, poised to revolutionize the industry. But Rose didn't linger on the words. Her gaze lingered on his face, searching for traces of the man she once knew, the man who had shared dreams over bowls of instant noodles, who had made her laugh so hard she couldn't breathe. He looked the same, yet entirely different, as if the years had polished away the softer edges she had loved. She closed the tab quickly, her chest tightening. She wasn't sure what she felt, anger, sadness, or some strange combination of both. What she did know was that she couldn't let herself spiral. Forrest had made his choice, and she had built a life without him. That was all there was to it. The next morning, life continued as usual, the kids' chatter filling the kitchen as they debated their plans for the weekend. Liam wanted to organize a neighborhood soccer game, while Caleb insisted they spend the day at the park feeding ducks. "Guys," Rose interrupted gently as she set plates of pancakes in front of them. "How about we do both? Soccer in the morning, ducks in the afternoon." Jade grinned, her artistic streak always leaning toward compromise. "And then we can draw the ducks afterward." "Perfect," Rose said, ruffling her daughter's hair. But as the morning unfolded, her mind kept drifting back to that article. She had thought she had moved on, but seeing Forrest's face had stirred something she wasn't ready to confront. Later that day, as she drove the kids to the park, she noticed her phone buzzing in the cup holder. She ignored it at first, focusing on the road, but when they arrived and the kids ran off to play, she checked the missed call. It was Grace. Rose called her back, curiosity prickling at the edge of her thoughts. "Hey, Grace, what's up?" "Rose?" Grace's voice was tinged with hesitation, unusual for her confident demeanor. "You're not going to believe this, but I just saw something odd. A news segment about Forrest. He's in town. Apparently there's some big tech conference happening downtown this week." Rose's heart sank. "Here? In Austin?" "Yes," Grace said, her tone cautious. "I thought you'd want to know, just in case." Rose didn't let her finish. "Thanks for telling me," she said quickly. "I'll handle it." Hanging up, Rose glanced toward the park, where her children were laughing and chasing each other. For the first time in years, she felt the walls she had built around her life trembling. Forrest was back, and whether she wanted to or not, she knew she couldn't avoid him forever. Unbeknownst to her, Forrest had seen the same article she had weeks earlier, an article featuring her clinic and its remarkable work with families. And just like her, he was realizing that the past he thought he had left behind was much closer than he ever imagined. The elegant ballroom buzzed with activity as guests mingled beneath shimmering chandeliers. The annual Children's Healthcare Gala was one of Austin's most anticipated events, drawing influential figures from across the city to raise funds for local clinics and hospitals. Rose stood near the stage, adjusting her notes for her short speech later that evening. She smoothed her navy blue dress, a classic choice that matched the understated professionalism she always exuded. But tonight, nervousness crept into her usually steady demeanor. This event was significant, not only for the clinic's funding, but also for her. It was a reminder of how far she had come since leaving her old life behind. As she glanced around the room, she saw familiar faces, parents of her patients, benefactors who had supported the clinic's growth, and her colleagues, including Grace, who waved at her from the refreshment table. In the far corner of the ballroom, Forrest Bennett adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit, a practiced smile on his lips as he exchanged pleasantries with another tech CEO. He had come to the gala at the invitation of a prominent investor, expecting a night of networking and a chance to polish his public image. But as his eyes scanned the room, they landed on Rose. For a moment, he thought he was imagining her. Her face, framed by soft waves of auburn hair, was one he had tried to push from his memory for years. She looked radiant, her posture confident, her presence commanding. Forrest's chest tightened as a wave of emotions hit him, guilt, curiosity, and something he couldn't quite name. Rose didn't notice him at first. She was engrossed in conversation with a couple, thanking her for the care their child had received at her clinic. Her warm smile and genuine interest were evident, and Forrest felt a pang of recognition. That compassion, that unwavering dedication, these were the qualities that had drawn him to her all those years ago. As the evening unfolded, the MC announced a brief intermission before the night's speeches. Rose took a moment to herself, stepping out onto the terrace to catch her breath. The cool night air was a welcome contrast to the bustling energy inside, and she leaned against the railing, gazing out at the city skyline. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until a familiar voice broke the silence. Rose. The sound of her name, spoken in that unmistakable tone, froze her in place. Slowly, she turned, and there he was. Forrest stood a few feet away, his expression a mix of hesitation and determination. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "What are you doing here?" Rose's voice was calm, but edged with surprise and caution. Forrest shifted uncomfortably, his hands in his pockets. "I didn't expect to see you here," he admitted. "But now that I think we need to talk." Rose straightened, crossing her arms. "About what?" Forrest took a step closer, his gaze steady. "About everything." Rose's eyes narrowed. "There's nothing to talk about. You made your choice, Forrest, and I've made mine." Before Forrest could respond, the sound of laughter and applause drifted from the ballroom, signaling the end of intermission. Rose seized the opportunity, brushing past him without another word, leaving Forrest standing alone on the terrace, a storm of unresolved emotions brewing in his chest. Inside, Rose returned to her place by the stage, her mind racing. She hadn't expected to see Forrest here, much less to hear him say he wanted to talk. Her heart was pounding, but she pushed the thoughts aside as her name was called. Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the stage to deliver her speech, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. Unbeknownst to her, Forrest had slipped back into the crowd, his eyes fixed on her as she spoke, a silent resolve building within him. He wasn't going to let this encounter be their last. As the applause faded and Rose stepped down from the stage, she was immediately surrounded by well-wishers and supporters. Smiling graciously, she exchanged handshakes and thanks, but her mind was elsewhere. The brief exchange with Forrest on the terrace replayed in her head like a loop, each word reverberating with an emotional weight she wasn't ready to confront. Forrest, meanwhile, lingered near the back of the ballroom, his gaze following her as she moved through the crowd. He had come to the gala expecting nothing more than another night of polished smiles and hollow conversations, but seeing Rose again had shaken something loose inside him. He had spent years convincing himself that walking away was the right choice, that his life of ambition and success couldn't coexist with the stability and compromise Rose had wanted. But standing here now, watching her command a room with grace and confidence, he couldn't help but feel the magnitude of what he had lost. As the night wound down, the guests began to drift toward the exits, murmuring goodbyes and exchanging final pleasantries. Rose excused herself from a conversation with a benefactor and made her way toward Grace, who was chatting with the event coordinator near the doors. "I think I'm going to head out," Rose said, her voice quieter than usual. Grace studied her for a moment, her perceptive gaze noticing the tension in her friend's posture. "You okay?" she asked. Rose hesitated, then nodded. "Just tired. It's been a long night." Grace didn't press further, but offered her a reassuring smile. "You did great up there tonight. The clinic's lucky to have you." "Thanks, Grace," Rose said, managing a small smile before heading toward the coat check. Forrest saw his opportunity and intercepted her just as she reached the lobby. "Rose, wait." She turned to face him, her expression guarded. "What is it, Forrest?" "I'm sorry for approaching you like this," he began, his tone earnest. "But we didn't get a chance to finish our conversation earlier." "That wasn't a conversation," Rose replied sharply. "That was you showing up out of nowhere and deciding you had the right to demand my time." Forrest flinched at the edge in her voice, but stood his ground. "You're right," he admitted. "I shouldn't have cornered you like that. But seeing you tonight, it brought back a lot. Things I thought I'd put behind me. Things I need to make right." Rose shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Forrest, I don't need your apologies, and I don't need you to make things right. My life is fine the way it is." "Is it?" he asked quietly, his eyes searching hers. "Because I saw the article about your clinic. I saw the photos of the kids." Her breath caught, and for a moment she couldn't speak. "They're mine, aren't they?" Forrest pressed, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. Rose's heart pounded as she weighed her next words carefully. The room around them seemed to blur, the bustling crowd fading into the background. Finally she met his gaze, her voice cold and firm. "They're my children, Forrest, and they're none of your business." With that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she exited the building. Forrest stood frozen, her words echoing in his mind. But this time, he wasn't going to let her walk away. Not without a fight. The morning light filtered through the curtains as Rose stood in her kitchen, the hum of the coffee machine filling the quiet space. Her thoughts were restless, circling around the events of the previous evening. Seeing Forrest again had been jarring enough, but his question, "They're mine, aren't they?" played over and over in her mind, like a melody she couldn't shake. She knew this moment would come eventually. She had always told herself that one day Forrest might learn the truth, but she hadn't expected it to be like this, in the middle of a crowded gala, with emotions raw and unguarded. The sound of small footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. Jade appeared in the doorway, her hair a tousled mess, clutching her favorite sketchbook. "Mommy, can I have toast?" she asked sleepily. "Of course, sweetheart," Rose said, her voice softening as she moved to prepare breakfast. Soon the kitchen came alive with the chatter of 4 children, each competing to tell her their plans for the day. Noah wanted to build a volcano model, Caleb was determined to bake cookies, and Liam had decided they should all go to the park after lunch. Rose nodded along, her heart swelling as she listened to their laughter. Whatever chaos had erupted the night before, this was her world. This was what mattered. But even as she immersed herself in their morning routine, a part of her couldn't ignore the undercurrent of unease. Forrest's presence had stirred something she thought she had buried, a fear of what his reappearance could mean for her family. Later that afternoon, as the kids napped, Rose sat on the couch with Grace, who had come over after hearing about the gala. Grace's face was a mix of concern and curiosity. "So he knows?" "Not officially," Rose replied, rubbing her temples. "But he's not stupid. He saw the photos. He asked, and I told him. Nothing." Grace leaned forward. Rose, you can't avoid this forever. He's their father. Don't you think he has a right to know? Rose's jaw tightened. A right? He gave up that right the moment he walked away. I've been the one raising them, loving them, sacrificing for them. He hasn't been here, Grace. He doesn't get to swoop in now and act like he's entitled to anything. Grace reached out and placed a hand on Rose's arm. I understand, I do. But if he's serious about wanting to be involved, maybe it's worth at least hearing him out. For the kids' sake. Rose shook her head, her voice firm. My kids are happy, Grace. They have everything they need. I'm not letting him disrupt their lives. Grace sighed, but didn't press further. She knew better than to argue when Rose was in this state of resolve. As the afternoon faded into evening, Rose found herself glancing at her phone more often than she cared to admit. She half expected a call or message from Forrest, but it never came. Instead, the house settled into its usual rhythm of dinner, bedtime stories, and the gentle hum of her children's breathing as they drifted off to sleep. But just as Rose began to relax, a knock at the door startled her. She froze, her heart racing. It was late, too late for an ordinary visitor. Hesitantly, she approached the door and peered through the peephole. It was Forrest. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door just enough to face him. What do you want, Forrest? She asked, her voice low and controlled. I need to talk to you, he said, his expression serious but not unkind. Please, Rose, just give me 5 minutes. Rose hesitated, every instinct telling her to shut the door, but something in his eyes stopped her. She stepped aside reluctantly, letting him in. Forrest stepped inside, his presence immediately filling the cozy living room. Rose closed the door behind him, her arms crossed defensively as she leaned against it. The room felt smaller with him there, the air charged with unspoken words. Forrest took a slow look around, his gaze catching on the framed drawings on the wall, the shelf lined with children's books, and the faint scent of lavender wafting from the candle on the coffee table. His eyes softened for a moment, but when they met Rose's, they were filled with determination. You've built something beautiful here, he said quietly. Rose didn't respond. She stood firm, waiting for him to get to the point. He took a deep breath. Look, I know I don't deserve your time, or even the chance to explain myself, but I need to know the truth. Are they mine? Her heart clenched. There it was, the question she had been dreading for 5 years, laid bare in the dim light of her living room. She glanced toward the hallway, where the quiet sounds of her children sleeping offered a fragile sense of calm. What does it matter, Forrest? She finally said, her voice sharp. Would it change anything? Would it erase the years you were gone? I don't know, he admitted, his voice steady but filled with emotion. But I need to know. I've been a fool, Rose. I made mistakes. Terrible ones. But if they're mine, I want to be part of their lives. I want to try to make things right. Rose laughed bitterly, shaking her head. Make things right? Do you even hear yourself? You can't just show up out of nowhere and decide you want to be a father. That's not how this works. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said, his tone firm. I'm asking for a chance. If they're mine, I have a responsibility to them, and I won't walk away again. His words hung in the air, and for a moment Rose saw a glimpse of the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had once promised her the world. But that man had also left her when she needed him most, and she wasn't ready to let go of the pain he had caused. They are mine, Forrest, she said finally, her voice trembling. Every late-night feeding, every scraped knee, every bedtime story, I've been there. Not you. You don't get to show up now and rewrite the past. Forrest nodded, his jaw tightening. You're right. I wasn't there, and I will never forgive myself for that. But I can be here now. Let me meet them, Rose. Let me show you that I'm serious. Rose hesitated, her resolve wavering. She wanted to protect her children, to shield them from the chaos she knew Forrest's presence could bring. But deep down, she also knew that they had a right to know the truth just as much as he did. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders sagging. This isn't about you, Forrest. It's about them. And if I even consider letting you into their lives, it will be on my terms. Anything, he said immediately, his voice filled with a quiet desperation. I'll do whatever it takes. She nodded reluctantly. Fine, but don't think for a second that I'll let you hurt them. One misstep, and you're out. Do you understand? Forrest met her gaze, his expression resolute. I understand. I won't let you down. Rose opened the door, signaling that the conversation was over. Forrest stepped outside, but paused before leaving. Thank you, he said softly, his voice barely audible. She closed the door without responding, leaning against it as a wave of exhaustion washed over her. This was just the beginning, and she knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. As she turned off the lights and headed to bed, she glanced once more at the hallway where her children slept peacefully, unaware of the storm brewing just beyond their little world. Tomorrow, everything would change. The sound of children's laughter echoed through the park as Rose sat on a bench, her watchful eyes scanning the playground. Liam was leading a small group of kids in a game of tag, his confident voice rising above the din as he called out the rules. Nearby, Noah was crouched by a tree, enthusiastically explaining the intricacies of his bug collection to Caleb, who listened with quiet fascination. Jade, ever the creative one, was sprawled on a blanket under the shade, sketching the scene before her with coloured pencils. It was a rare moment of calm for Rose, and she allowed herself to savour it. But her peace was short-lived as she noticed a figure approaching from the far side of the park. Forrest. Her breath hitched, and she instinctively straightened her posture. This was the first time he would see the children up close, and she wasn't sure how either side would react. True to her word, she had agreed to let him meet them under her supervision, though every fibre of her being was on high alert. Forrest approached with measured steps, his expression a mixture of nerves and determination. He wore casual clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt, but his usual confidence seemed tempered, almost hesitant. When he finally reached the bench, he offered a tentative smile. "Thanks for letting me come," he said, his voice low. Rose nodded but said nothing, her gaze flicking back to the children. She gestured subtly toward them. There they are. Forrest followed her gaze, his eyes softening as he took in the sight of the 4 kids playing. For a moment he seemed frozen, as if the gravity of the situation had finally settled on him. "They're amazing," he said softly, almost to himself. "They are," Rose replied, her voice firmer, "and they're happy. That's what matters." Forrest nodded, his gaze lingering on each child. "How do you want to do this?" Rose hesitated, then called out, "Liam, Jade, Noah, Caleb, come here for a second." The kids came running, their faces flushed with excitement and curiosity. Jade clutched her sketchbook tightly, while Noah's hands were full of leaves and twigs he'd collected for his project. "Mum, who's that?" Liam asked immediately, his sharp eyes locking onto Forrest. Rose took a deep breath, crouching slightly to meet their level. "This is Forrest," she said, keeping her tone calm. "He's someone I wanted you to meet." "Hi, Forrest," Caleb said shyly, stepping slightly behind Rose. Forrest crouched down as well, his movements careful and deliberate. "Hi, Caleb," he said warmly, then looked at each child in turn. "It's nice to meet all of you. I've heard a lot about how smart and creative you are." Jade tilted her head, studying him with an artist's eye. "You talk like Liam," she observed bluntly, making Liam frown. "I don't," Liam retorted, crossing his arms. Forrest chuckled softly, glancing at Rose. "I guess that's a good start," he said under his breath. Rose didn't respond, her focus on the children. "Why don't you all show Forrest some of the things you've been working on?" Noah stepped forward eagerly, holding out his collection. "These are bugs I found today. See? This one is a beetle, and that one's a ladybug." Forrest nodded, leaning closer. "That's impressive. Did you find all of these yourself?" As Noah launched into an animated explanation, the other kids began to warm up, each one vying for Forrest's attention in their own way. Rose watched carefully, her arms crossed but her expression softening as the initial awkwardness began to fade. As the afternoon unfolded, the children grew more comfortable around Forrest. Liam, initially guarded, began explaining the rules of their latest soccer game, his tone authoritative yet tinged with curiosity about this new adult in their lives. Caleb stayed close to Rose but occasionally glanced at Forrest with shy interest, while Jade, ever the observer, sketched quietly but kept sneaking glances at him. Forrest, for his part, navigated the interaction with a patience and attentiveness Rose hadn't expected. He listened intently to Noah's detailed bug explanations, nodded thoughtfully at Jade's artistic insights, and even agreed to be the referee for Liam's impromptu soccer match. His natural ability to connect with them surprised her, though she tried not to let it show. At one point, Jade tugged on Forrest's sleeve, holding out her sketchbook. "Do you want to see what I drew?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. "I'd love to," Forrest replied, crouching down to her level. She flipped through a few pages before stopping at her latest work, a vibrant drawing of the park, complete with trees, the soccer field, and stick figure versions of her siblings. "That's Noah, Caleb, and Liam," she explained, pointing to each figure in turn. "And that's me under the tree." Forrest's eyes softened as he studied the picture. "You're really talented, Jade. This is incredible." Jade beamed at the praise, her cheeks flushing with pride. "Thanks," she said, clutching the sketchbook to her chest. Rose, observing the scene from a distance, felt a mix of emotions. Relief that the children were responding well to Forrest, but also a lingering unease. This was only the beginning, and she couldn't ignore the fear that opening this door might bring complications she wasn't prepared for. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting golden hues across the park, Forrest took a seat on the bench next to Rose while the kids continued their game. For a moment they sat in silence, the only sound the distant laughter of the children. "They're amazing," Forrest said again, his voice low and filled with awe. "They are," Rose agreed, her tone cautious. He hesitated, then turned to face her. "Thank you for letting me do this. I know it couldn't have been easy for you." "It wasn't," she admitted, her eyes fixed on the children. "But they deserve to know who you are. Just don't make promises you can't keep, Forrest. They've been through enough." "I won't," he said firmly. "I mean that, Rose. I'm here, and I want to be part of their lives, for real this time." Rose turned to him, searching his face for any hint of insincerity. "We'll see," she said finally, her tone guarded but not entirely closed off. "This is about them, not you. If I even think for a second that you'll hurt them—" "I won't," Forrest interrupted, his voice steady. "I'll do whatever it takes to prove that." Their conversation was cut short as the kids came bounding over, breathless and grinning from their game. "Can we get ice cream?" Noah asked, his eyes wide with hope. Rose laughed softly. "I think you've all earned it." Forrest stood, slipping his hands into his pockets. "I'll treat," he offered, glancing at Rose for approval. She hesitated but nodded. "All right," she said, "but just this once." As the group headed toward the nearest ice cream stand, the children's chatter filling the air, Rose felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. But beneath it was a cautious resolve. This was only the beginning, and the road ahead would require every ounce of strength she had. The steady rhythm of rain against the windows filled the quiet house as Rose sat at the dining table, sorting through a stack of school permission slips and medical forms. Her mind, however, was elsewhere. The park meeting with Forrest had gone smoother than she had expected, but the unease in her chest hadn't disappeared. It had been a week since that afternoon, and while the kids seemed eager to talk about their new friend, Rose found herself struggling to navigate the new dynamic. Forrest had kept his word so far, respecting her boundaries and not pushing for more than she was ready to allow. Yet his presence in their lives felt like a precarious balance she was constantly trying to maintain. Her phone buzzed, pulling her attention away. It was a message from Grace. "How are things with Forrest?" Rose sighed, typing back, "So far, so good, but I'm not letting my guard down." Grace's reply came almost immediately. "Smart. But don't forget to breathe. You're doing great." Rose smiled faintly, grateful for Grace's unwavering support. She was about to return to her paperwork when a loud knock at the door startled her. She glanced at the clock. It was late, far too late for visitors. When she opened the door, she found Forrest standing there, his face pale and his eyes wide with concern. Rain dripped from his jacket as he stepped back slightly to give her space. "What's wrong?" Rose asked immediately, her chest tightening. "It's Liam," Forrest said, his voice taut. "I was supposed to pick him up from soccer practice, but when I got there, the coach said he'd already left with another parent. I've been trying to reach you, but your phone wasn't ringing." Rose's stomach dropped, her mind racing as she grabbed her phone from the table. The screen lit up with a missed call notification from an unknown number. Her heart pounded. "Stay here with the others," she said sharply, grabbing her car keys. "I'll find him." "Wait," Forrest said, stepping forward. "You're not going alone. Let me help." Rose hesitated, her instinct to protect her children warring with the urgency of the situation. Finally, she nodded. "Fine. Let's go." The car ride was tense and silent as Rose gripped the wheel, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Forrest sat beside her, his jaw clenched, scanning the rain-slicked streets. "Liam's smart," Forrest said, breaking the silence. "He knows to stay safe. We'll find him." Rose didn't reply, her focus on the road. Her thoughts spiraled as she replayed the last few days in her mind, wondering if she had missed any signs that something was wrong. They arrived at the soccer field, now deserted and drenched in rain. Rose stepped out of the car, shouting Liam's name, her voice hoarse with worry. Forrest joined her, his own calls echoing into the empty night. Then, from the far corner of the field, a small voice called out, "Mom!" Rose turned, relief flooding her as she spotted Liam huddled under a small pavilion, his arms wrapped tightly around himself. She ran to him, dropping to her knees as she pulled him into her arms. "I was so scared," Liam whispered, his voice trembling. "I didn't know where you were." "It's okay, sweetheart," Rose murmured, holding him close. "I've got you. You're safe now." Forrest crouched beside them, his hand resting gently on Liam's shoulder. "We've got you, buddy," he said softly. Liam looked up at Forrest, his expression uncertain but grateful. For the first time, he didn't pull away. Rose helped Liam into the car, wrapping him in the spare blanket she always kept in the back seat. His damp clothes clung to him, and she noticed his hands trembling slightly as he held the blanket tightly around himself. Forrest sat beside him, glancing at the boy with quiet concern. "Are you hurt, Liam?" Rose asked gently as she adjusted the heat. Liam shook his head. "No, I'm okay. I thought I saw Caleb's friend's mom. She said she'd give me a ride, but when I went to her car, it wasn't her. I got scared and ran back to the field." Rose's heart clenched. "You did the right thing, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you for staying safe and finding a place to wait." Liam nodded. his eyes still wide with lingering fear. Forrest cleared his throat, his voice calm and steady. "That was a smart move, Liam. It's always okay to trust your gut if something feels wrong." For a moment, Liam looked at Forrest, his guarded expression softening slightly. "Thanks," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. The drive back to the house was quiet, the tension in the car slowly ebbing as the rain began to let up. By the time they arrived, Liam was half asleep, his head resting against the window. Forrest carried him inside, his movements careful and deliberate. Rose followed closely, her maternal instincts on high alert as she checked on the other children, who were still sound asleep. Once Liam was tucked into his bed, Rose lingered in the doorway, watching him breathe evenly. She felt a rush of relief, but also a pang of guilt. Forrest joined her in the hallway, his voice low. "He's going to be okay. You handled that well." Rose turned to face him, her arms crossed protectively. "This could have ended so differently, Forrest. I can't afford for anything to happen to them." "And it didn't," he said firmly, "because you're a great mom, and Liam knew what to do because of you." His words caught her off guard, and for a moment she felt her defenses falter. But the vulnerability was fleeting, quickly replaced by the familiar wall she had built over the years. "This is why I've been so cautious," she said, her voice tight. "Their safety, their happiness, it's everything to me. I can't let anything disrupt that." "I get it," Forrest said softly. "I do. But Rose, I'm not here to disrupt anything. I want to help. I want to be someone they can count on." Rose searched his face, her emotions warring within her. "We'll see," she said finally, her tone a mix of skepticism and exhaustion. The two stood in silence for a moment before Rose spoke again. "Thank you for helping tonight. I couldn't have done it alone." "You don't have to," Forrest replied, his voice steady. "Not anymore." As he left, the house fell silent again, but Rose couldn't shake the weight of his words. She returned to her room, lying awake for hours, her thoughts tangled between the past and the uncertain future. For Liam and the others, the night would fade into memory, a small scare quickly overshadowed by their next adventure. But for Rose, it was a reminder of how quickly life could shift, and how difficult it was to protect the fragile balance she had fought so hard to create. Rose stood at the kitchen counter, staring blankly at the pile of dishes in the sink. The previous night's events lingered in her mind, and although Liam seemed to have moved on, playing contentedly with his siblings, Rose couldn't shake the knot of worry in her chest. Forrest's words echoed in her thoughts. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." For years, she had been the sole protector and provider for her children. Trusting someone else to share that responsibility felt both foreign and risky. Forrest's sudden involvement in their lives had opened a door she wasn't sure she wanted to walk through, but the relief she'd felt when he stepped in last night was undeniable. Her phone buzzed on the counter, breaking her train of thought. It was a message from Grace. "How's Liam doing?" "Want me to stop by later?" Rose typed back quickly. "He's fine, but I think I need to talk. Come over if you can." An hour later, Grace arrived, armed with a bag of groceries and her usual calming presence. She set the bag on the counter and immediately turned her attention to Rose. "Okay, spill. What's going on?" Rose exhaled deeply, leaning against the counter. "Last night was a lot. Forrest helped, and I didn't realize how much I needed it until it happened. But now I feel like I'm losing control of everything." Grace nodded, her expression understanding. "You've been in survival mode for so long, Rose. It's hard to let someone else in when you've built your entire world around doing it all yourself." "That's just it," Rose said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know if I can trust him. He left once, and I can't risk him doing that to them. Grace reached across the counter and placed a hand on Rose's. You're right to be cautious, but maybe he's trying to make up for that mistake. What does he have to gain by being here if he wasn't serious? Rose didn't answer immediately. The logical part of her knew Grace had a point, but her heart still clung to the pain of abandonment. Before she could respond, the sound of the front door opening interrupted them. Rose's heart skipped a beat as Forrest stepped into the kitchen, holding a small toolbox. "Sorry to barge in," he said, glancing between the two women. "Liam mentioned the kitchen faucet was leaking, so I thought I'd take a look." Rose's eyebrows shot up. "You don't have to—" "I want to," Forrest interrupted gently, setting the toolbox down. Grace gave Rose a knowing look before excusing herself with a quick, "I'll let you two handle this," and headed to the living room where the kids were playing. Rose crossed her arms, watching as Forrest rolled up his sleeves and got to work under the sink. "You're really leaning into this helpful dad role," she said, her tone edged with skepticism. Forrest paused and looked up at her. "I'm trying to show you that I'm serious, Rose. I'm not just here for a quick visit. I want to be here for them, for you too, if you'll let me." Her defenses bristled at his words, but there was also a part of her that wanted to believe him. She leaned against the counter, her gaze fixed on the toolbox as she considered what to say next. Rose folded her arms tightly across her chest, her eyes narrowing as she weighed her words. "You say all the right things, Forrest, but words aren't enough. You left once. What happens when things get hard again? Are you just going to walk away?" Forrest pushed himself out from under the sink, wiping his hands on a towel as he stood. His face was calm, but his voice carried a quiet intensity. "You think I don't regret leaving? I wake up every day wishing I could undo what I did, but I can't. All I can do now is prove to you, and to them, that I'm here for the long haul." Rose's gaze flickered toward the living room, where the kids' laughter floated through the house. "They've been through so much already. I won't let anything jeopardize their happiness, not even you." Forrest took a step closer, his tone firm but not confrontational. "I understand that, Rose, and I don't expect you to trust me overnight. But I'm not asking for a free pass. I'm asking for a chance to earn it." The vulnerability in his voice caught Rose off guard, and for a moment her walls wavered. But before she could respond, a loud crash from the living room shattered the tension. Rose and Forrest rushed toward the noise to find Caleb and Noah staring guiltily at the remnants of a broken vase on the floor. Jade sat cross-legged nearby, sketchbook in hand, looking completely unbothered. "What happened?" Rose asked, her voice exasperated but calm. Caleb stepped forward, his eyes wide with worry. "I was showing Noah my magic trick, and he bumped the table." "It was an accident," Noah interjected, his face red. Rose sighed, crouching down to their level. "It's okay. Accidents happen, but you both need to be more careful. Let's clean this up together." Before she could grab the broom, Forrest was already there, carefully picking up the larger shards. "I've got this," he said, his voice gentle as he worked quickly. "You two go grab a dustpan and some paper towels to help." The boys hesitated, glancing at Rose, who nodded in agreement. They scampered off, leaving Rose standing awkwardly beside Forrest. "You didn't have to jump in like that," she said softly, watching him. "I wanted to," he replied simply, looking up at her. "I'm here, Rose, for the little things too." The boys returned, and together they finished cleaning up the mess. As the last piece of glass was swept into the trash, Caleb tugged on Forrest's sleeve. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" he asked, his voice hesitant but hopeful. Forrest glanced at Rose, who looked away, before crouching to Caleb's level. "If it's okay with your mom, I'd like to." Caleb grinned, satisfied, and ran off to join the others. Rose stood in silence for a moment, watching her children as they resumed playing. Then she turned to Forrest, her voice steady but cautious. "If you're serious about being here, you'll need to show them every day. This isn't just about earning my trust, it's about earning theirs." Forrest nodded, his expression resolute. "I wouldn't expect anything less." As the evening wore on, Rose couldn't help but feel the faintest flicker of hope. Forrest was far from proving himself, but for the first time she allowed herself to wonder if he might actually be capable of the change he claimed. She still wasn't ready to let her guard down, but as she watched Forrest help Noah with a science project and Caleb with his magic trick, she realized that the walls she had built might not be as unbreakable as she thought. The real question was whether Forrest could sustain this effort, or if history was doomed to repeat itself. The sound of the children's laughter filled the backyard as the golden afternoon sun cast long shadows over the neatly mowed grass. Rose stood on the porch, her arms crossed, watching Forrest play with the kids. Liam was leading a makeshift soccer match, barking orders at his siblings, while Forrest acted as the referee, balancing his role between fair judge and enthusiastic cheerleader. Jade sat under the large oak tree, her sketchbook propped on her knees as she captured the scene, occasionally calling out critiques of Forrest's refereeing decisions. Caleb alternated between chasing the ball and sitting in the grass to inspect the flowers. Noah, ever the strategist, shouted suggestions to his team from the sidelines. Rose had to admit that Forrest was trying, really trying. Over the past few weeks, he had shown up consistently, keeping his word and finding small but meaningful ways to integrate himself into their lives. He'd taken Noah to a science exhibit, helped Jade find new art supplies, and even let Liam win a debate about soccer rules. But no matter how much he contributed, Rose couldn't shake the feeling that it might all fall apart. Her thoughts were interrupted when Grace stepped out onto the porch, holding 2 glasses of iced tea. "He's getting better at this," Grace said with a wry smile, handing one of the glasses to Rose. Rose took a sip, her gaze fixed on Forrest as he dramatically pretended to trip over the soccer ball, sending the kids into fits of laughter. "Yeah," she admitted. "He is, but I still don't know if it's enough." Grace leaned against the railing, her expression thoughtful. "It might never feel like enough, Rose, but at some point you'll have to decide if you're willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. He's trying, and that has to count for something." Rose sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's not just about me trusting him. It's about the kids. If he messes this up, they're the ones who'll get hurt. I can't let that happen." Grace placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I know, but I also know that you can't protect them from everything. Sometimes they have to see for themselves who someone really is, good or bad." Before Rose could respond, Liam's voice rang out. "Mom, come play. We need one more for teams." Rose shook her head, smiling faintly. "I think you've got enough players." "Come on," Noah chimed in. "Forrest can't keep up. We need you." The kids' persistence won out, and Rose reluctantly joined the game. Forrest stepped back to let her take over as referee, but the children insisted he stay on as a player. It was chaotic but fun, and for a brief moment Rose allowed herself to enjoy it without overthinking. But just as the game was wrapping up, a sudden buzz of her phone pulled her attention back to reality. She stepped away to check the notification, her stomach dropping as she saw the name on the screen. Evelyn. Her mind raced as she stared at the message, a sinking feeling creeping over her. Whatever Evelyn wanted, Rose knew it wouldn't be good, and it could threaten the fragile peace she and Forrest were beginning to rebuild. Rose's fingers hovered over the phone screen, her heart pounding as she debated whether to open the message. Evelyn's name alone was enough to stir a flood of emotions, resentment, unease, and a simmering anger she had buried for years. Taking a deep breath, she tapped the notification. The message was short but pointed. I heard Forrest is spending a lot of time with you. We need to talk. Rose clenched her jaw, gripping the phone tightly. Evelyn's reappearance felt like a cruel twist, as if the universe had been waiting for the moment when things started to stabilize just to throw her off balance. She quickly locked the phone and slid it into her pocket, forcing herself to focus on the present. Forrest was helping Caleb pick up the soccer ball, his easy smile making the boy giggle. The kids were still chatting excitedly about the game, their energy unshaken by the late afternoon heat. Rose walked back to the group, masking her unease. "Mom, did you see my goal?" Liam asked, his eyes bright with excitement. "I did," Rose replied, forcing a smile. "That was a great shot." Forrest straightened, his attention shifting to Rose. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice low enough that the kids wouldn't hear. "Fine," Rose said quickly, brushing past him. "I'm going to start dinner. Can you keep an eye on them?" Forrest hesitated, clearly sensing that something was off, but he nodded. "Of course." Inside, Rose busied herself in the kitchen, her movements brisk and precise as she chopped vegetables and prepped a pot of pasta. But her mind was miles away, replaying the message over and over. What could Evelyn possibly want? And why now, after years of silence? By the time Forrest and the kids came inside, the meal was nearly ready. Rose served dinner as usual, keeping the conversation light for the children's sake, but her tension didn't go unnoticed. After the kids were in bed, Forrest lingered in the living room, clearly waiting for Rose to return from tucking them in. When she finally joined him, he stood, his expression serious. "Rose, what's going on?" he asked. "Nothing," she replied, crossing her arms defensively. "Don't do that," he said gently but firmly. "I know when something's bothering you. Is it about the kids, or is it about me?" Rose hesitated, debating whether to tell him. She hated feeling vulnerable, especially with someone who had once broken her trust. But Evelyn's message wasn't something she could ignore, and Forrest deserved to know. She sighed, pulling out her phone and showing him the message. Evelyn reached out. Forrest's face darkened as he read the text. "Of course she did," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "What does she want?" Rose asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "I don't know," Forrest admitted, his jaw tightening. "But I'll handle it. You don't need to get involved." Rose raised an eyebrow, her skepticism clear. "You think she's just going to let this go? She's reaching out for a reason, Forrest. And if it has anything to do with the kids, I need to know." "I'll talk to her," he said firmly. "But I promise you, Rose, I won't let her cause problems for you or the kids." Rose stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any hint of doubt. Finally, she nodded, though her unease lingered. "You'd better not. Because if she tries to disrupt their lives—" "She won't," Forrest interrupted, his voice steady. "I won't let her." As he left for the night, Rose stood by the window, watching his car pull away. Her instincts told her this was only the beginning of another storm, one that could unravel everything she had worked so hard to protect. She just hoped Forrest was ready to weather it. Forrest sat in the dimly lit cafe, his fingers tapping against the edge of his coffee cup as he waited. The warm hum of conversation and the clinking of silverware filled the air, but he barely noticed. His focus was entirely on the meeting ahead. Evelyn had chosen the location. Neutral ground, she'd called it, but Forrest knew better than to trust her intentions. When she arrived, her entrance was as calculated as always. Evelyn strode in wearing a tailored blazer, her heels clicking against the floor as she scanned the room. When her eyes landed on Forrest, a small, knowing smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "Forrest," she said smoothly as she slid into the seat across from him. "It's been a while." "Not long enough," he replied evenly, his expression unreadable. Evelyn arched an eyebrow, clearly unfazed by his tone. No need to be hostile. I just wanted to talk. Forrest leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Cut to the chase, Evelyn. What do you want? She sighed dramatically, brushing an invisible speck of dust from her sleeve. Always so direct. Fine. I've heard you've been spending time with Rose and her charming little family. His jaw tightened. That's none of your business. Oh, but it is, Evelyn countered, her smile sharp. You see, Forrest, people talk, and when they do, they tend to mention things, like how a certain billionaire is suddenly very interested in playing daddy to 4 adorable kids. Forrest's expression darkened. Get to the point. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly. The point is that you've got a lot to lose, Forrest. Your reputation, your company, everything you've worked so hard to build. And if word gets out about your little reunion with Rose, people might start asking questions. Questions that could make things very complicated for you. Forrest's hands curled into fists under the table, but he forced his voice to remain calm. If you think you can blackmail me, you're wasting your time. I don't care what people say. Don't you? Evelyn said sweetly. You've always cared about appearances, Forrest. That's why you left her in the first place, isn't it? To focus on your precious image? The jab hit its mark, but Forrest didn't flinch. Instead, he met her gaze with unwavering determination. I made mistakes, Evelyn, but I'm not running from them anymore, and I'm not letting you use my past to hurt Rose or the kids. Evelyn studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned back with a shrug, as if the conversation had bored her. Suit yourself, but don't say I didn't warn you. She stood, smoothing her blazer before glancing down at him one last time. You've changed, Forrest. Let's see how long it lasts. As she walked away, Forrest sat motionless for a moment, the weight of the encounter settling on his shoulders. He knew Evelyn wasn't finished, but he also knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let her derail what he was trying to rebuild. Later that evening, when he arrived at Rose's house for dinner, his resolve was stronger than ever. Whatever battles lay ahead, he would face them head-on. For the first time in years, he had something worth fighting for. The smell of spaghetti filled the air as Forrest stepped into Rose's kitchen, greeted by the familiar hum of family life. Caleb was sitting on a stool at the counter, carefully sprinkling Parmesan cheese over his plate, while Jade meticulously folded napkins into shapes that vaguely resembled flowers. Liam and Noah were arguing good-naturedly about who could eat the most, their voices a symphony of boyish enthusiasm. Rose glanced up from the stove as Forrest entered. Her expression was guarded, but there was a flicker of something softer in her eyes, a reluctant acceptance of his presence. You're just in time, she said, her tone neutral. The kids are starving. I can see that, Forrest replied with a small smile, stepping further into the room. He ruffled Noah's hair as he passed, earning a mock-annoyed protest. Need any help? Rose shook her head. It's under control. You can help by keeping them from demolishing the table before we eat. Forrest chuckled and moved to sit at the table, engaging the kids in a lively debate about the best toppings for spaghetti. He was careful not to overstep, letting them take the lead while subtly finding ways to connect. Rose observed from the stove, her hands busy, but her mind elsewhere. She hadn't told him about Evelyn's message yet, unsure of how to broach the subject. Her instinct was to shield the kids and herself from whatever drama Evelyn might bring. But as much as she hated to admit it, Forrest's steadfastness in the past weeks had begun to chip away at her defenses. Once dinner was served, the table filled with the chaotic energy of 4 kids trying to talk at once. Jade showed Forrest her latest drawing, Liam recounted his soccer practice in vivid detail, and Noah launched into an explanation of his newest science experiment. Caleb, quieter than the others, watched it all with wide eyes, occasionally chiming in with a shy comment. Forrest listened intently, his focus completely on the kids. Rose found herself momentarily distracted by the ease with which he fit into the scene. It felt natural, almost like he had always been there. After dinner, as the kids were occupied with a board game in the living room, Rose finally found a moment to speak with Forrest alone. She leaned against the kitchen counter, her arms crossed, her expression serious. "I need to tell you something," she began, her voice low. Forrest turned to face her, his brow furrowing slightly. "What is it?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Evelyn reached out to me. She sent a message implying that she knows about us, about you being here with the kids. I think she's trying to stir up trouble." Forrest's jaw tightened, but he didn't look surprised. "I talked to her today." Rose's eyes widened. "You what?" "She asked to meet," he explained. "She wanted to warn me that being involved with you and the kids could damage my reputation. She's trying to manipulate the situation, but I made it clear that I'm not backing down." Rose stared at him, processing his words. "And you think she'll just stop?" "No," Forrest admitted, his voice firm. "But I don't care what she tries to do. She's not going to scare me off, Rose. Not this time." Rose studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of doubt. What she saw instead was resolve, a determination that felt unshakable. "I hope you mean that," she said quietly, her voice tinged with both hope and hesitation. "Because if she tries to hurt my kids, there won't be a second chance." Forrest nodded, his gaze steady. "I won't let it come to that. I promise." For the first time, Rose felt a small sliver of trust begin to take root. The battles ahead were far from over, but in that moment she allowed herself to believe that maybe they could face them together. The sound of children's laughter filled the backyard as the crisp autumn breeze carried the scent of freshly baked apple pie from the kitchen. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the scene. Rose stood on the porch, watching the twins race across the lawn with kites they had decorated earlier in the day. Jade was perched under the oak tree, sketchbook in hand, capturing the moment with a concentration that always made Rose smile. Caleb sat nearby, carefully arranging leaves into a neat pile, his quiet nature shining through even in play. The past few months had been a whirlwind of emotions, challenges, and changes. Forrest's re-entry into their lives hadn't been easy. There had been missteps, tense conversations, and moments when Rose had wondered if she was making the right choice. But little by little, he had proved his commitment, not just to her, but more importantly, to the children. Rose's heart softened as she watched Forrest crouch next to Caleb, helping him perfect the symmetry of his leaf arrangement. His patience and gentleness with the children had become a constant, a quiet reassurance that he wasn't the man who had walked away years ago. "Mum, are we ready for cake yet?" Liam called out, running up the porch steps with Noah close behind. "Not yet," Rose replied, ruffling Liam's hair. "We're waiting for Aunt Grace and Margaret to get here." The boys groaned in unison, but quickly turned their attention back to the kites, their energy seemingly endless. Rose smiled, stepping back inside to check on the final preparations. The dining room table was set with simple but thoughtful decorations, Jade's hand-drawn place cards, a bouquet of wildflowers from the park, and the chocolate cake the kids had insisted on for their birthday. As she adjusted the candles on the cake, Forrest entered, carrying a tray of drinks. "Everything looks perfect," he said, setting the tray down. "Thanks," Rose replied, glancing at him. There was a warmth in her voice that hadn't been there months ago, a subtle but undeniable shift. He hesitated, then added, "You've done an amazing job, Rose. With them, with everything. I don't think I've ever said that enough." Rose paused, meeting his gaze. For the first time, the words didn't feel like an attempt to win her over. They felt genuine, rooted in respect and understanding. "Thank you," she said simply. Before either of them could say more, the sound of the doorbell broke the moment. Grace and Margaret had arrived, their arms laden with gifts and laughter. The house quickly filled with the warmth of family and friends, the kind of chaos that felt more like a celebration than an inconvenience. As the candles were lit and the kids gathered around the table, their excitement was infectious. Rose couldn't help but laugh as Noah tried to blow out the candles prematurely, earning mock protests from his siblings. "All right, everyone. Together now," Rose said, her voice filled with joy. 1, 2, 3. Make a wish." The candles flickered out amid cheers, and for a brief moment, Rose looked around the room. Her children were beaming, their faces lit with happiness. Forrest stood nearby, his presence no longer feeling like an intrusion, but an integral part of their lives. For the first time in years, Rose felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them together. As the party wound down, the golden hues of the setting sun faded into a soft twilight. The children, still buzzing from the excitement, darted between the backyard and the living room, showing off their gifts and laughing over inside jokes only siblings could understand. Margaret and Grace sat on the porch, sharing stories and sipping cider, their voices blending into the comforting hum of the evening. Inside, Rose began clearing the table, stacking plates and gathering crumbs left behind by eager little hands. Forrest joined her without a word, taking the dishes from her and heading toward the sink. They worked in quiet rhythm, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. "You didn't have to do all this," Forrest said eventually, his voice breaking the quiet. "You've made everything so special for them." Rose smiled faintly, drying a plate. "They deserve it, every bit of it." "They do," he agreed. "But so do you." Rose glanced at him, caught off guard by the sincerity in his tone. She started to brush it off, but his steady gaze stopped her. "It's easy to forget yourself when you're raising kids," she said softly. "They've been my whole world for so long. And honestly, I don't regret that." "I don't think you should," Forrest replied, setting a glass on the drying rack. "But I hope you know you don't have to carry it all alone anymore." Rose exhaled deeply, her hands pausing mid-motion. She had heard similar words from him before, but tonight they felt different, more grounded, more real. She nodded, not trusting herself to say more. When the last of the guests had left and the children were finally tucked into bed, Rose found herself standing on the porch, staring up at the clear night sky. The stars seemed brighter than usual, twinkling against the dark canvas. Forrest joined her, leaning on the railing, his hands in his pockets. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I used to think success was measured by what I could build, what I could achieve. But I think I had it wrong." Rose turned her head slightly, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this," he said, gesturing toward the house behind them. "Laughter, love, family. I was so busy chasing everything else that I didn't realize this is what I wanted all along." Rose looked at him, her expression softening. "It's not always perfect, Forrest. It's messy and hard, and sometimes it feels like it's all falling apart." He nodded, his gaze steady. "But it's worth it." For the first time, Rose allowed herself to believe him fully. She reached out, resting her hand on the railing beside his. They didn't speak, but the quiet understanding between them said more than words ever could. Inside, the soft sound of Caleb turning in his sleep reached the porch, a reminder of the life they were building together. Not perfect, but deeply meaningful. Rose smiled faintly, the weight of the past finally lifting as she stood beside Forrest under the endless stretch of stars. The story wasn't over, but for the first time, it felt like a beginning. A new chapter they would write together, one filled with laughter, love, and the unshakable bond of family.